The other important concept in terms of the mindset for negotiation involves what is called the conceptual tip. In every negotiation, the party that has the most time, the most information, and the most power will gain an edge. And this is what it means. Information in terms of preparing to negotiate. And I will walk you through exactly what you need to know in terms of preparing yourself to negotiation when we get into the process part of negotiation. But research and information pays a great deal in terms of negotiating. Like Sun Tzu in The Art of War, he said, you win battles even before you step onto the battlefield, okay? Which actually dovetails Dwight Eisenhower's comment about planning and plans, because the strength of a plan hinges in its flexibility to adapt to change. Whereas planning is indispensable in the means that it forces you to evaluate all the factors that will actually happen and then act accordingly as the situation changes. So with regard to these three factors, information rules in every negotiation. Now, the other factor that is important in negotiation is time. Deadlines are deadly because when you push someone against their deadline, stress will set in. They will go from system 2 thinking to system 1 thinking, and they will start reacting. That's when you get the concessions. So in terms of deadlines and negotiation, you never ever disclose a deadline. And you almost always try to find out what the deadline is on the other side. Because once you push them against the negotiation, their thinking will switch. System 2 thinking to system 1 thinking. Have you ever wondered why, for instance, Muhammad Ali would actually infuriate George Foreman in a fight and actually win the fight? Well, I never understood that. Why would you actually infuriate someone that can pummel you to death? That's not not a smart move. Until I understood the relationship between system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. Limbic system versus prefrontal cortex. If you're infuriating someone, that person is acting under the fight or flight mode. They're not thinking logically, okay? So they will make mistakes. That's why you find those situations where one party infuriates the other knowingly so that they can start reacting rather than responding to the situation. That's when I started understanding the difference between a distributed negotiation and an integrative negotiation, when I started to understand the difference between positions and interests. This only comes from being there, making mistakes, okay, and understanding why was it that you were so dumb to say what you said. Only by analyzing that you understand that you were under stress and you were not thinking. So what I'm sharing with you, these are hard-earned lessons from many mistakes that I have made over the years, but have allow me to understand what a win-win negotiation is, the importance of interest versus positions in a negotiation, and what I'm sharing about the deadlines and the relevance of a deadline in negotiation, as well as the role of information. And there's the P in TIP stands for power. And this is something that also took me a while to understand. Power in negotiation is not your ability to make the other party do what you want them to do, okay? Power in negotiation comes from the alternative that you have to negotiating that deal with the other party. Okay? That's what gives you power in the negotiation. How good of an alternative you have, okay? So as you see, negotiation has its own language, where power doesn't mean subjugating the other side, where power means alternative and the quality of your alternatives. So in terms of putting together your mindset, understand the key beliefs, understand the types of negotiation that you're getting into. Almost every single one of the negotiations that you will find begins as a distributed negotiation. Okay? Begins negotiating on one thing, which is usually price. Your goal is to move the negotiation from one dimension to as many dimensions as you can include. Okay? In an M&A deal, it's not about price. It's about price, it's about the size of the earnout, it's about who does what for whom, It's about what is included in the deal or not included. It's about what are the contingencies to closing. All these factors come into the offer and should come into the offer because that's the only way in which you can expand the pie. Otherwise, you're negotiating a zero sum, or if you negotiate each one of these factors that I told you one by one, you're actually in a zero sum game every time that you get into each one of these. Your offer should be a comprehensive offer, okay, that is negotiated as a whole. If you start picking and choosing each individual factor, then you move the negotiation back into a distributed negotiation rather than being an integrative negotiation. So we looked at the part of the mindset. The other part of the mindset involved this. All these techniques that I'm sharing with you, they are important. But even more important is to be perceived as fair, as honest, and acting with integrity in the negotiation. And this is not just wishful thinking. There is a lot of science behind this. Okay? Number one, an important principle that you need to remember is that you need to let the other side save face every single time. You never corner someone into a corner without leaving them a way out. Okay? You always help the other person explain the transaction to someone else. Okay? We all report to someone, even if it is to our wives, okay, or the husband. We all report to someone. So you need to help the other person explain the deal to their boss or their wife or their husband. Okay, help them save face. And the reason why I say this, there is something called the ultimatum game. This is a psychological experiment that has been conducted thousands of times in universities as well as in professional environments. And it involved this. You have two people, and you give $100 to one of the two people. Okay? The rule is this. Person number one, the one that got the $100 bill, will make an offer to person number two. Person number two only has two options, either to accept the offer or to reject the offer. If person number two accept the offers, they split the bill, the $100 bill, in whichever way number one proposed. If number two rejects the offer, then number one has to return the $100 bill. So no one has anything in the end. Well, this experiment has been conducted thousands of times, and the finding has been this. Usually, they will agree to split the $100 bill when the offer is about 40 to 50% split. Whenever the offer is 30% or less, that offer is rejected, meaning that the person number two is forcing the person number one to return the $100 bill, even though it makes no sense. Because even a $1.99 offer wouldn't make sense. At least you have $1 in your pocket that you didn't have at the beginning, right? So logically, a 1% split makes sense. But yet, every time that the offer is less than 30%, person number two forces person number one to return the bill, and no one ends up with anything. What demonstrates is this. You will punish someone at your own cost if you feel that you have been treated unfairly. This is something that I always remember when I'm dealing with someone. If I'm perceived, not necessarily that I am unfair, if I'm perceived to be unfair, trust me, the other party will get back at me at their own cost. The ultimatum game is what proves what I'm telling you. That this is part of the science of negotiation. Not the art, but the science of negotiation. How you judge a successful negotiation is by making sure that the outcome actually accomplishes the needs of both sides, that the negotiation is the best alternative to the ones that you have found out at the beginning in the preparation, making sure that the solution fits what are considered to be standards of fairness, and that the other party feels that they will do a negotiation with you again in the future, and that they will live up to their commitment. So when you have those 5 factors, then you have a successful negotiation. And I will show you how you get to that in the next section when we look at the right process. Now, fortunately, negotiation is a skill, okay, as well as a process. And because it is a skill, it gets better with practice. But you have to know how to practice, and you have to know where to begin. And I've given you the beginning, mindset, the belief that you need to instill in yourself, and the daily practice. Now, when we talk about the negotiation process, there are 6 stages that every negotiation goes through. Okay? We begin with the preparation, followed by a discovery meeting, followed by the brainstorming of solutions based on what you uncover during the discovery meeting, followed by the decision, which is finally what you will agree to do, then followed by an analysis of what worked and what didn't work, which is the post-mortem, and then a way for you to capture that learning through checklist or other means so that you don't repeat the same mistakes twice. That is the process of negotiation. Now remember what I told you about the 80-20? The 20% here that is responsible for 80% of the outcome is the preparation. And this is something that you do even before you sit down with the other side. So being preparation so important, this is where I spend most of the time in negotiating an M&A transaction. It's not sitting with the other side talking about the letter of intent, talking about the agreements that will be put in place as part of the overall transaction. I spend 80% of the time preparing for the negotiation. Remember what I told you about Sun Tzu and winning wars? They are won before even you step into the battlefield. That's a truth that it is uncontestable. I can tell you that many of the negotiations where I have participated, I owe the result to the preparation that I did. So the question is this: being preparation so important, what is that you do to prepare for a negotiation? And what you do is this. There are actually what are called the 8 cornerstones of a negotiation. And never ever walk into a negotiation, no matter how trivial, without going through these 8 elements. Number 1 involves the core interest in the negotiation. Remember, we talk about not positions, but interest. So this means knowing what I want and why I want it, or why my client wants certain things and why they want it. I also need to know what the other side wants and why they want it. Of course, at this stage, all I can do is formulate an assumption as to what they want and why they want it. Okay? But it's an important step, and I'll tell you how you go over the next step in the process. But at this stage, you need to be clear as to what you want, why you want it, and then be clear as to what the other side wants and why they want it. You also need to know what are your alternatives to non-negotiating that deal. Okay? This is what is called a negotiation in a BATNA. BATNA is a term that was created by the Harvard Negotiating Project, and it means best alternative to a negotiating agreement. That's a BATNA. So you need to know, if you don't reach an agreement in a negotiation, what would you do? Remember what I said about power in a negotiation? This is what gives you the power in a negotiation. This is what gives you the conviction to say to the other side, thank you, but we will agree to disagree, and I don't believe that we will reach an agreement today. And you walk out. Only your BATNA and the quality of your BATNA will allow you to do that. That's where the power in negotiation resides. Okay? Remember, it's not about subjugating the other side to your will. It's about the quality of your options, and the BATNA is what allows you to do that. So you need to determine what is your BATNA to negotiating. Okay? And you need to find a way to strengthen it. Once you know what it is, you need to find a way to strengthen that option. You also need to do the same thing for the other side. You need to formulate a hypothesis about what is the BATNA for the other side. And then find a way to weaken it. Okay? Remember, we haven't been even met with the other side yet. So all we can do at this stage is formulate assumptions as to what these are. Then you need to come up with what is called a walk-away price. What would be the price at which you will walk away from the negotiation? This is extremely important because especially in mergers and acquisitions, when you're working on the buy side, you need to know where your parameters are. Where would you stop the process? Okay? There is something in negotiation especially M&A negotiation, called deal heat. Okay? And this is the scientific term for this is non-logical escalation of commitment, okay? Or non-rational escalation of commitment, meaning that you get into a situation that becomes competitive and confrontational, and you start running your budgets of time, energy, money, and resources. You fall in what is called the sunk cost fallacy, and the more difficulty you're going to have to walking away from the deal, okay, and wanting to see the deal happen at whatever cost, okay, whether that is your ego or the mechanics of the negotiation or your competitive kicking in. It will lead you to overpaying for the transaction. That is the reason why more than half of the M&A transactions in this country fail, because the buyer ends up overpaying. And that's the reason why the vast majority of the transfer of wealth go from the buyer to the seller, the shareholders of the buyer to the shareholders of the seller. Overcommitment. Then, the other thing that you need to determine is the zone of possible agreement. Okay? And again, I'm a big believer in being clear on fundamentals. Okay? So when I talk about value, I can tell you the concept behind it. When I talk about win-win negotiation, I tell you what the concept is. As far as the zone of possible agreement, this is what it looks like. In every negotiation, in every transaction, okay, you will have one side, which is the seller, that comes into a deal with two numbers in mind. Okay? They should come into a deal with an ideal price that they want for their business, and they should also come in with what is called the walk-away price, a point below which they are not going to sell. A buyer, on the other hand, also comes in with two numbers in mind. They have an ideal price at which they would like to do the transaction, and then they should come in with another price called the walk-away price, above which they should not do the transaction. Well, the difference between these two form what is called the ZOPA, or zone of possible agreement, but it's this zone, the zone between these two ideal prices. Okay. When I walk into every single M&A negotiation, I need to know what these numbers are. I need to know what the walk-away price is for the seller, and how I know this price is because I find what the value of the business is in the hands of the current owner. That is what I call value as held. Okay. I also need to know what the value of the business is in the hands of the normal operator in an industry. That is what is called the intrinsic value of the business, or the value of control. If you take control of this business and you optimize their operating margins, and you optimize their growth rate, and optimize their cash flow by making sure that the CapEx, or capital expenditures in the business that are supporting growth, are optimized, then you will reach this point. In addition to this point are the synergies that I'm going to look for in the transaction, which is that point Z over there. Okay? The reality is that most buyers end up overpaying and end up in a point beyond point C. So in every negotiation, there will be a zone where the deal will happen, which is here. Okay? If I'm in on the buy side, my first offer will probably be here, so that then I can move the negotiation process here. If I'm on the sell side, it will probably begin here, and then I move the price down here. That is part of my negotiation strategy. Preparation, this is part of my preparation. These 5 numbers, I need to know them even before I sit down with the other side, because they define what the playing field looks like. Where are the parameters? Where are the limits? Okay? Without this, I'm flying blind. Okay? How many people you know sit down to negotiate with this in mind? Very few. Okay? But I'm giving you the tools to now have an edge in negotiations as part of the preparation process.